Excellent. Welcome, welcome. I'm super impressed. There's people here already, even though we opened up right on the dot of the hour. That's really wonderful. I'm Duncan Chappell. I'm going to be introducing Jen in a few minutes. We're gonna. Wow, people are coming in really quickly. This is fantastic. Analyst relations measurement is clearly a super important and engaging tactic for people. But I'm just going to give a few more seconds until the number of people in the webinar has kind of stabilized, and then when everybody is here, then I will get going. Yeah. Good. And as people will know, this won't be the first Zoom meeting you've been in. Up at the top, there are Q&A features that you can use. So please use the Q&A. Yeah, we love that. It's a highly effective thing to do. I'm going to be keeping an eye on questions as they come in during the session. Please use the Q&A. One of the things we have found is the chat can kind of get carried away a little bit as participants in the conversation. Jen and I want to take part in the conversation. We can't do that if things are in the chat and the Q&A in the Q&A. Then it's easier for us to do this. So just to begin, obviously measurement is like the existential problem of analyst relations. Yeah, it's hugely troublesome in a whole series of ways. Yeah. Firstly, as you can tell from the title of this webinar, it's all geared around intangibles. Yeah. Secondly, the flip side of that is actually the tangibles in analyst relations are extremely hard, almost impossible for AR people to measure. They can only be measured by salespeople, by people who are at the pointy customer facing part of the business. And then there's another challenge, which is that the kind of operational data that we as analyst relations professionals rely on is often not very digestible by our boss's boss or our boss's boss's boss. And this is something where I've been hugely impressed by Jen's work over the years. So Jen is somebody who's got a long background in media relations, has been working in analyst relations for a few years, and I think particularly at Skillsoft, really impressed me as somebody who was innovating with ways of presenting information, aggregating information, linking up the kind of analyst relations outreach side of things with the lead generation and tracking analyst content and tracking the value of analyst content. And because of this expertise, this kind of unique approach, actually, we were very happy to have her join the Analyst Relations Forum boardroom event in San Francisco last November, where Jen was able to present to about a dozen very high octane analyst relations leaders and talk about and learn about some of the struggles that people are learning there, especially when we're trying to justify analyst relations to the people who are holding our budget, who are querying our expenditures, who are balancing whether to add more money onto analyst relations or onto vendor contracts. So that's the framework for the discussion today. I can even see some things coming in on the Q&A, and one great question: will we be sharing the slides? Yeah, we will do that. We will share the slides, absolutely. And even I'm not gonna get distracted and put a link to download them in the chat. It's just gonna make everyone look at the slides instead of listening in the conversation. But yes, we absolutely will do this. I should also say that we're recording this. If you ask questions, we're going to try to do our best to not, dox you or like use your full name or anything, no matter what the question is. But the questions and the answers will be orally in the recording. So think about that if you want to share. And someone's turned on, and there's closed captioning is turned on as well for people who want this. Though I hope it even comes out in the recording as well. Okay, so Jen, I'm gonna hand over to you. Katie Payne is the goddess Athena on Mount Olympus for for media measurement experts and has been for decades. But can I just invite you to start off your talk and to kind of kick off with this comment by Katie?
Yeah, I would be happy to. And thanks so much, Duncan, for having me today. I'm excited to be able to have the opportunity to have this conversation with everyone and help people develop a stronger framework for measurement. So this quote really stood out for me. AR measurement is one of my favorite topics, despite it giving me countless headaches and gray hairs over the years. And I'm guessing that some of you in the audience may have also struggled with how to capture numbers that adequately demonstrate the value that your program delivers, let alone making the business case for AR. You're certainly not alone there. AR is a tricky function. It's difficult to demonstrate the momentum and the value in the short term because it takes so long, several months, really, if not years, to truly move the needle and show how value is delivered back to the business. And too often, AR relies on tallying, activity-based metrics to measure program success. But counting, like you see in this quote here from Katie, counting doesn't demonstrate program impact or business value. And so as an AR community, I think we need to identify and really standardize a more meaningful way to measure program impact. With that, Duncan, I think we can go ahead and jump to the next slide. Perfect. So today is really all about raising the bar for AR measurement. After our discussion, you'll have fresh ideas and inspiration on how to develop a set of AR objectives with tangible, measurable metrics that align to key business goals. That's certainly what we hope you walk away from today's session with. Hopefully, you'll also learn some new ways to quantify your program that up until now have really just been qualitative talking points. They haven't been something that you've been able to kind of put tangible value to. And then lastly, we'll talk about how you can analyze these newfound metrics to continually optimize program performance. And I think, Duncan, maybe we can run the poll. So before we jump into the content, we'd really like to just do a quick poll so we can better understand what your relationship is with measurement. It's no surprise there's a ton of roadblocks that are usually a barrier to measurement. So we're just curious about some of the pain points that the audience is experiencing related to measurement, whether it be time, not knowing how to deliver effective measurement, a lack of strong data, or a variety of other factors. Give you another few seconds here. And Duncan, I'm not sure if you can see the results of the poll.
Yeah, I can see the results of the poll. I imagine you can as well, can't you? I hope you can. Yeah. If not, I can let you know what they are.
I can't.
Okay. So shall I kind of read through the results in order for our
Yeah,
or in fact, if I end poll, you can see I'm super smooth at this, right? I've actually never done a poll in Zoom before, but I can't remember what happens if I click the end poll button. But I hope if I end the poll, I'll get the option to show the results to you. But basically, the highest result here is the lack of outcome-based metrics. We have 44% of people who've selected that. Then in second place, it's not knowing how to build a strategic measurement process. That's at 20%. And then in third place is unable to secure alignment on desired outcomes. So yeah, I think you might be able to see the results. Yes, you can see the results.
They just popped up.
Even if you're yes, participants can see the results. Now I know how to do it. Fantastic.
Perfect. And that's really encouraging to hear that, some of the areas where people are looking for some support is kind of learning how to elevate their metrics. And then also, just learning how to kind of build that framework. So you're in the perfect place. That's what we're going to set out to accomplish today. So with that, Duncan, I think we can hit the next slide and really jump into it.
Excellent. Good.
Perfect. So our goal is that you walk away from today's session with some really practical new ideas on how to make the business case for your AR program, and doing that through kind of elevating your measurement framework and really knowing how to go ahead and build that. Too often measurement is conducted as an afterthought, and it's used to determine, how effective a program or a project was after key work has already been completed. In order to really maximize the impact of measurement, goals should be established and in place from the beginning. So when creating a measurement framework, you first want to make sure that there's alignment with business priorities. And for a wide variety of reasons, we sometimes fall victim to developing and executing a program strategy in a vacuum. Operating in this silo, our program may not ultimately align with furthering department or even business-wide objectives. And so establishing a measurement framework provides a great opportunity to re-examine that alignment and identify where AR can have the biggest impact on key business priorities. And impact, of course, is important, but you definitely want to consider if focusing on supporting that business objective aligns with the AR program and what you're trying to accomplish. So for instance, sales and revenue targets, those are a common business goal, but they may not be the right place for every PR or AR program rather to focus. So for an AR program that's at an early stage company, driving awareness or creating a new category, that might be more beneficial for that business and for the AR program than focusing on supporting the revenue side of things. Now, when it comes to setting quantifiable metrics, every strategy must start with some measurable objectives, but alignment on what the overall program is designed to achieve is needed before you can really establish any measurement goals, right? So once you have determined the program objectives, you're ready to set those measurable outcomes. And whatever you do, resist the urge to adjust your objective based on what's easiest to measure. Remember that true measurement demonstrates business value, and this type of measurement is more complex to track and compile. It's going to take work to arrive at that data that provides actionable conclusions. Also, when setting those measurable outcomes, make sure that they're quantifiable and that they can be defined in business terms. The key here is really to decrease the reliance on those activity-based metrics. Those are the measures that focus on baseline outputs like briefing count and coverage count, and instead identify some outcome-based metrics that better demonstrate impact in business terms. Duncan, I know that the AR industry has historically been challenged by measurement and specifically establishing a standard for measurement that demonstrates business impact. Do you want to talk at all about the importance of elevating measurement overall in order to make the business case for AR?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of reasons why we would want to elevate measurement. Ironically, the most powerful reason to ensure that we have measurement is so we can understand why our measurements aren't working. Yeah? All the time I see analyst relations programs that have got a strong suite of measurements, which essentially explain the execution of the program itself. Is the cadence right? Are they meeting the right people? Are the analysts like the content of the briefings? All of these are a little bit like kind of looking at the dashboard in your car to understand how the machine is performing, but it may not actually be as useful as a windscreen to let you know whether you're going in the right direction. So this point about aligning with business priorities was actually the I think in a way the most contested, the most challenging part of the boardroom discussion we had with these AR leaders in Silicon Valley back in November, because there really are many AR programs that are saying, as the role of the analyst relations program is to listen and to delight analysts, and we really, can't mechanically link ourselves to business objectives. And other people are saying, well, your analyst relations program is not going to get very far unless you're able to show your contribution to the business. The business might want different things from different analyst relations programs. Yeah, some people want awareness, some people want lead generation, some people want insights for the business. Some people, they don't need leads; they're already in the deal. They need those deals to accelerate through the sales pipeline or to close more often. So people have got different business goals, and that means there's no one measurement regime that is going to work for everybody. But I would say that unless analyst relations teams are really thinking about the value that they are providing to their stakeholders, if they are only measuring how well they are doing what they're doing, then it's going to be really hard for them to defend and extend the resources that they have.
Yeah, that's precisely right, Duncan. You raised a lot of really relevant points, a few that we'll actually tackle in the next slide. But before we move on, there's something that I quickly just want to reiterate that may seem obvious, but when the time comes after you've collected enough data to convey program impact and momentum, be sure to double down on using the business outcomes that you've established when you're reporting on your program value, right? It's so important to convey those program outcomes in business terms instead of kind of reverting back to the AR program activity outcomes, because this will help you really make the strongest case for the value for AR and the value that it's delivering to the business. And, being able to relate that in business terms is really key to secure approval for additional budget, additional resources, or whatever it is that you need to keep growing your program. So with that, we can move on to the measurement framework. Perfect. So creating a measurement framework brings together a lot of the elements that we just discussed, aligning AR objectives with business priorities and ultimately mapping measurable outcomes back to those objectives. And what we've done here is create a measurement framework template to help you put your AR plan on a page. And to Duncan's point, there are a variety of different business objectives that AR can support. And so what we've done is we've identified 4 of the most common business goals that AR programs support, and we've outlined how AR objectives, tactics, and ultimately AR outcomes in the form of more meaningful metrics ladder back up to each of those business priorities. This is not by any means an exhaustive list, but we hope that it provides a helpful starting point and some inspiration as you look to shape a measurement framework that's based on the needs of your business. And a few call outs here before we move on from this slide. I think it's really important to spend a few minutes discussing the AR outcomes, because we just spoke about how important it is to dig deeper and push beyond some of those baseline activity-based metrics. And again, those are the things like briefing counts and coverage counts. So on this slide, we've provided several different examples of metrics that push you to go a few layers deeper. So for instance, for a program that's focused on driving brand awareness and improving perception, counting the numbers of briefings held and the amount of coverage generated, that doesn't actually demonstrate that the analyst meetings that you're holding are resulting in any higher quality of coverage. So instead, you'd be better off measuring things like the percentage of coverage that includes partial or key messages, in addition to things like how dominant and prominent your brand appears in that coverage. Duncan, I know that your team has some experience analyzing the yield of analyst pitches for clients and tracking the amount of engagements that are accepted versus denied. Do you want to share some examples of how you've seen those insights deliver value in terms of how brands are perceived by analysts?
Yeah, absolutely. This is something actually that we've learned from our media relations colleagues. So and I know I have to whisper about that because I know as analyst relations people don't like to admit that we could learn anything from our media relations colleagues. But actually, in my business, they're using a tool called Propel, which is a targeted CRM that is really designed for them to track the effectiveness of their pitches into journalists. And one of the intriguing things about that is actually the ability to run analytics on that. So it allows you to see not just is a particular pitch strong or weak, but when they're targeting particular influencers, are these influencers more or less likely to accept invitations from particular vendors or from particular industries? And then at an even more aggregated level, is one company much more likely to say yes or to say no than another company, in which case that means you probably need to work more closely on the pitches. What we've been able to do over the last calendar year, for example, I was looking at the numbers for this recently. In the first half of last year, we had to put in roughly 50% more pitches to get a briefing than in the second half of the year. And the impact of that is simply tracking the pictures and being able to do that analysis and see how effectively they are working. And so when we talk about yield, we're talking firstly about the ratio between how many requests we make for briefings and how those convert into briefings. And of course, another widely used yield metric is to see how many interactions you need to conduct before you get a piece of content, a piece of coverage coming out. In that, not everybody is tracking, well, everybody I suppose is tracking share of voice. Not everybody cares about share of voice that much. But I think these yield metrics are extremely useful, and they force you to focus a little bit on what are the things that what are the denominator and the numerator in your thing. How close is that? How close are the things that you're tracking yield to business value? I think it really opens up a conversation, as well as sharpening the productivity. Definitely for us, it's driven a huge improvement in our productivity, starting to think about yield in that way.
That's great. That's a helpful example. Perfect. Supporting sales is another popular example, definitely popular in terms of a business priority that a lot of AR programs center around. But many of us in AR, we don't own the budget that's used to invest in licensing analyst content or securing an analyst to speak on a webinar or at a company event. And some of us may even be running programs where organization-wide there just isn't budget or even a desire to invest in these activities. But even if $0 are being spent on AR content, there's still an opportunity to track dollars closed from prospects who are influenced by analysts during the sales process. So if the sales team isn't doing it already, you can urge them to engage their contacts in a conversation around where they heard about your company, and if an analyst report, especially if there's a relevant Magic Quadrant, Wave, or other vendor assessment, if that report was a factor. And if you're at a company that does invest in analyst content, you can collaborate with colleagues across marketing, sales, or business intelligence to set up a process for gaining access to data on the performance of that content. Of course, every organization has its own key metrics and success indicators, but generally speaking, you'll want to know how many people downloaded the content, how many people registered and attended events that featured a participating analyst, and how many qualified leads those campaigns generated. Ideally, you'll also be able to track how many opportunity dollars and, really ultimately how many dollars closed in terms of the sales from those campaigns. So that's some data that you would be able to generate from work like this. So Duncan, I think we can go ahead and go on to the next.
And actually, Jen, if I can just jump in on this, I'm
Yeah.
taking a look at the questions, and I
Perfect.
know I promised you that I wouldn't disturb your flow too much with questions, but there's a really interesting comment. It's really, yes, but it's framed as a question, but really it's a comment, I think, where somebody says, according to Gartner, 80% of the value of analyst relations is in the private conversations between the analyst and the customer, in which the analyst recommends the vendor. So, I'm going to whisper, maybe Gartner would say that, since a big part of their business model is selling those conversations. And I think two things flow from this. Like the questioner has said, how do you measure that? Right? How do you measure these private conversations? The other thing that comes to mind to me is, like, take this example of the business that is able to license analyst content and track those leads coming through CRM and through to sales. I mean, certainly I've had clients where almost 100% of the value of analyst relations came from reprints. And the other measurable value was there, but it was just so small compared to how much they were able to generate through, to generate through reprints, for example. So I suppose there are two questions there. Like, one is, how could you try to measure the impact of those private conversations? You've got any ideas there? And then the other thing is, like, are there vendors for which actually the main value of analyst relations could be completely different from the main value for analyst relations for another vendor? I think you've kind of got these four use cases here. Maybe that's suggestive in ways.
Yeah, no, great question. So for the first, it's tough to track, all of those conversations that are happening behind closed doors, right? I think this is where, having a process in place with the sales team to just make sure that there are conversations happening when, they're getting RFPs or, ultimately they're closing deals with customers. Having a conversation where, the sales team is better understanding, how that company, how those contacts learned about your business. That's where, you can surface a lot of those insights in terms of, oh, actually, we saw you in that Gartner report or that IDC MarketScape. There's things that are going to slip through the cracks for sure. But you would be surprised about the impact that you really could surface from those conversations, or even just kind of putting out a question to the sales team to see if they've heard mention of any of the analyst reports and conversations with sales. So I think that's a great starting point. Again, there's not really going to be a perfect solution, unfortunately, unless you have great relationships with the analysts and they can kind of tell you, oh, I mentioned you to, so-and-so, but that's not always the case. For the second question, to your point about some AR programs really, solely being focused on supporting sales through kind of reprint licenses, they might not necessarily be meeting with analysts, right? They may just be looking to either kind of commission content that they're able to publish, or maybe they're just finding relevant content out there that validates their position in the industry, or a category that they're trying to create. So they might not necessarily be even meeting with analysts or have much of a focus on the awareness that they're trying to build amongst the analyst community. And it's really just about the performance of the dollars that they're investing in these pieces of analyst content. So that's why it's so hard to really kind of put your finger on a one size fits all solution for measurement, because priorities can be, vastly different across organizations, even in the same space, same size, et cetera. So it's definitely very custom to the needs of each business.
Fantastic. We've got more questions, but I know we've also still got a lot of your slides to work our way through. So I think what I might do is let you resume your talk track, and then we can pick things off as we go through.
Sounds good. Perfect. So the only type of measurement system that demonstrates true value combines both the qualitative and the quantitative data, and quantifying the qualitative or the intangibles in an AR program is definitely necessary. I'm sure, all of you out there, you have kind of gut feelings and hunches about the impact or the momentum of a program. But if we can't, quantify that and put it on paper, it will only get us so far. So this slide here is really focused on elevating some creative ways that we can quantify some of the more qualitative aspects of AR. Share of voice, that's a very common measure in communications. It's frequently used in AR to capture the prevalence of analyst coverage your brand receives relative to a competitive set. And while I think in a lot of cases it's necessary, I think it also doesn't paint the full picture. So for instance, your brand could be struggling to keep up with competitors in terms of share of voice. And in turn, maybe your stakeholders are pressuring you to secure more mentions, but what they don't have visibility into is the quality of the coverage and how that compares to the competitive set. So this is where something like a coverage quality score comes in. And again, you may have a hunch that your brand outperforms competitors when it comes to driving meaningful mentions that influence prospective buyers. But for many, we can't necessarily kind of put our finger on anything that kind of quantifies that. So with a coverage quality score, you can define what that perfect piece of analyst coverage looks like, and you can determine a custom methodology for scoring each individual piece of coverage. You can create the scoring methodology by determining what matters most and then allocating points based on how each report meets your set of criteria. So for instance, maybe the 5 things that you care most about and want to create scores based off of could be the tier of an analyst firm, the influence of the analyst who wrote the report, whether your brand was featured prominently or just had a brief mention in that report, how meaningful the topic was. So imagine that a Magic Quadrant versus a trending, like a feature in a trending technology report versus a mention in a market sizing report, those will all be scored differently. And then finally, a score that captures whether or not key messages were included. So once you have each piece of analyst coverage that's scored based on that methodology, you can take the averages and you can create a custom weighted calculation to capture that coverage quality score. And so this is the graphic that you see on the middle of the slide. From there, you would use that same methodology to analyze coverage across the competitive set. And then you could populate a competitive scoreboard to supplement share of voice, engage the quality of competitors' coverage relative to your coverage. So that's the graphic that you see on the bottom of the slide. And then the AR program score, that's the last intangible that we haven't discussed. And this measure takes a few of the most important scores from your coverage quality analysis and combines it with some of the analysis of program performance overall. As we've talked about, the inputs are going to be specific to each organization and their needs, their priorities, and what's important to that brand. But it could include scores related to the ratio of meetings to coverage, the strength and strategic value of analyst engagements held, or even relationships that were improved with key analysts. And really the significance of this score is to develop a benchmark for how well the AR program is performing and then measure over time how the program's evolving. And before we move on from this slide, just want to, remember, have a reminder out there that measurement, it's not for the faint of heart. We don't always uncover data that paints a beautiful picture, but with that data, we can understand what isn't working and then optimize how we spend our time and how we spend our budget to drive tangible value to the business. And with that, Duncan, perfect. So we talked a little bit about the coverage quality score methodology on the previous slide, but here's a visual of how you can actually go ahead and plot that analyst coverage on a chart, and you can see, a heat map of sorts of your coverage. This here is a little bit of an oversimplification. It just has a sample of analyst coverage just to, show how it could present in a visual manner. And with this particular coverage quality score, it was based on a 15-point system, with 15 being the perfect score. The x-axis here represents the coverage quality score for each individual piece of coverage, while the positioning on the y-axis is relative to the influence of that piece of coverage. So for instance, a Magic Quadrant, a MarketScape, a Wave, that would be positioned higher in terms of influence than a report that is focused on an emerging trend or a mention that's in a market sizing report. And then the influence of the analyst factors in here as well. So does the influence of the analyst firm. And then visually, you can also just see the value of the coverage based on the size and the color of the circle. So the bigger the circle, the stronger the tier of the analyst firm, while green represents a positive sentiment, gray is neutral, and red is negative. And last thing before we move on from this slide, when you're plotting coverage using this methodology over time, you would hope to see a higher concentration of coverage in that upper right portion of the chart. And that would illustrate that the coverage that's being generated is getting stronger and more meaningful over time. All right, so if you're like me, you've found it difficult to really capture the value that your AR program delivers on a single slide, but hopefully we'll change that today. What we'll see in the next slides is a variety of AR dashboards that have been designed to elevate storytelling and demonstrate the value that AR delivers to the business. So as we've talked about today, every AR program is going to have a different dashboard, and every organization, they've got kind of their own set of priorities and their own success indicators, but hopefully these next two dashboards represent starter templates that you can use and you can build off of to really just elevate how you articulate AR program value to the business. So this example here, this one was designed for an early stage AR program, and one that maybe doesn't have much access to data beyond, some of the more programmatic data. And they might not really be doing much beyond kind of engaging in activity where, they're meeting with analysts. There might not be much more to the program in the early stage beyond that. But the value of having a dashboard like this is to demonstrate the impact that that program is still able to have. And the good news for any managers of smaller AR programs out there is that this dashboard, it pulls in a wide range of data, but it's all things that you can compile manually. You don't necessarily need to have any kind of outside investments in AR management software. And then this analysis that you see here, it goes beyond the basic activity-based metrics to analyze and quantify some key markers of coverage quality and program performance. And it may be difficult for programs at this early stage to show business value, but there's still an opportunity to dig deeper and develop a more rigorous set of metrics to demonstrate, in this particular case, a program's ability to drive brand awareness and achieve some meaningful coverage. I'll pause here, Duncan, in case there are any questions, or if there's anything that you want to speak to in terms of, dashboards and having like a more metrics forward approach to AR.
I mean, there was a really powerful comment a bit ago, just saying, that it's a fantastic observation that measurement is not for the faint of heart, but it's such an important part of the conversation, even if the data doesn't initially paint a pretty picture. Yeah, it's the only way to improve it. And I think that there are a few aspects to this. One is clients' internal stakeholders are often very impatient, aren't they? I was speaking to a company recently that was something like, it's like a $500 million company. They'd had an analysis done that said that if they had highly effective analyst relations, they could probably add at least 6 million onto their 500 million of revenue by doing analyst relations well. And they asked, well, how long will that happen? And of course, how long it happens, hinges on what they themselves do. If they lock themselves in their room and don't speak to any analysts, well, actually, it will never happen. If they make a huge investment in speaking to analysts, marshalling their case, analyzing competitively, amplifying what analysts say, licensing the content, then you could have them more quickly. And one of the great things about these measurements is that they not only show where you're at, but as you were doing in these colors, is you're showing velocity. Yeah? You're showing the vector of change, and that's a very good way to be able to speak to the organization about whether the amount of effort being allocated for analyst relations is right. Share of voice measures, are hugely controversial in some places. Yeah, I remember being in some IIAR setting where somebody said something like, "Well, actually, nobody is measuring share of voice." I was at a massive gathering of analyst relations people. Somebody said in London, I guess, and we asked who was measuring share of voice. Nobody there was tracking share of voice. And I mean, maybe in some very exceptional setting that could be the case. But actually, the great thing about share of voice is it gives you a competitive benchmark. And of course, not all measurements are equal. We have this power of voice approach that our measurement team use here at CC Group, which is basically like giving different weights to different pieces of content, the way that you do with your content quality score, weighting different pieces of content to show how that can be done. And actually, on that topic, there's a really lovely webinar that my colleague Matthew Denby, I interviewed our measurement lead Matthew Denby on this, and on our YouTube channel you can find a webinar with him going into the mechanics of this in a little bit more depth. But the competitive view is often where your stakeholders can grasp hold of it. They bite their teeth in, not just in terms of the percentages, but also whether these are the right competitors to assess. Maybe for one part of your business, there are different competitors. For another part of the business, there's some new competitors that they haven't heard of. Certainly, I found for many AR programs, we only find out about what competitors we should be aware of when we start circulating share of voice analysis. So even if you don't take the analysis too seriously in itself, it pays for itself simply in being able to sense check with the rest of the organization to make sure that you're capturing what you need to do. The other thing that I hugely appreciate with the way that you presented these benchmarks, Jen, I mean, I've seen more than one of these from you, is the way that it makes it so easy to also weave in results from licensed content. And that if you have positive content that is generated by analysts, very often analyst relations programs behave as if all they have to do is get analysts to write, nice things about the company or nasty things about the severity of the business problem, and then the job is done. When in fact, we need to give these pieces of content wings so that they circulate. And weaving in that is an extremely strong way, not just of showing value for money from content, and I know you speak about that later on very powerfully with some shock findings that what you spend on content is often not the is often, you don't often get what you pay for, but also again it makes explicit the value to the business that is being generated from this activity. Yes, I should let you get on. I'm sorry.
Not a problem at all. I mean, I think share of voice, certainly controversial, but I think, I think it's a supporting measure more than a primary measure, right? I think, it's good to have that competitive benchmark, like you said, but it's not the holy grail of measurement by any means. And I think we need to look towards power of voice and some of these more authoritative, more kind of qualitative measures to really round out the value of coverage. So with that, I think we can go ahead and jump to the next slide and dig into what maybe a more mature program dashboard looks like. So, here there's a little bit more of an opportunity to certainly combine some of the more meaningful markers of AR program success from the previous dashboard and combine that with data that demonstrates the business impact. So here you can see that, we report on some of the key programmatic metrics. There's, still the share of voice benchmark. There's the coverage quality across the competitive set. There's the percentage of leadership placement in vendor evaluations, percentage of tier 1 coverage, key message pull through, et cetera. But on top of that, we layer a set of metrics that demonstrate leads generated and revenue influenced by analyst content. So if you know the amount of money total that's been invested in analyst activity, that includes, all the costs to license content and commission speaking opportunities, in addition to just, your annual contracts with the different firms, you could actually calculate what a program ROI and what, a figure for investment gain would be, so that you've got some really, really tangible metrics that show business value of the AR program. And remember, by presenting this program impact in a metrics-driven dashboard, you're able to more closely mirror how your leadership team reviews business performance. And in turn, you're more likely to capture their attention and really be able to present your business case for AR. So really, again, just can't emphasize enough the importance of speaking the same language as your stakeholders versus only speaking in terms of analyst relations. This will really just allow you to articulate in business terms how your program is adding value to the business. So with that, Duncan, I think we can jump to the next slide. And here we'll start talking about how we can optimize using this data, because now that you've got more meaningful way of reporting on AR program impact, your work is done, right? Obviously, we know that that's not correct. The beauty of measurement is that it provides value in so many different forms. Of course, there's the value in gaining the insight into the measurable outcomes, but the data that you uncover also enables continuous improvement. And by analyzing your data, you can really pinpoint on both a macro and a micro level what's working well or what needs fine-tuning. So we can jump to the next slide and talk a little bit about how we can use these insights that you uncovered to continually optimize performance. So here, one of the measurement techniques that we talked about today is, analyzing the data that you collect to optimize performance. And by examining all of the data inputs that make up the AR program score and the coverage quality score, it's really easy to pinpoint some specific areas of weakness. So, for example, measuring a variety of key inputs in this level of detail, you can spot what's underperforming. So when it comes to the AR program score inputs, you could potentially learn that, a program is maybe generating a high cadence of analyst engagements, but the focus of these meetings are not strategic in nature, and ultimately they're not well aligned with the program's objectives. Or for instance, you could learn that, maybe you're spending time with the most influential analysts in your space. However, the ratio of meetings to coverage is higher than anticipated because these analysts just aren't generating much coverage. So how would you be able to take those learnings and actually adapt your program? First, you could tackle the weakness around meeting strategy by revisiting your program goals and identifying which meetings just aren't aligned with your goals. Maybe there are meetings that really aren't required of your program, or they're not adding significant value. So my advice would be to, reduce those types of engagements going forward and be more purposeful and more proactive in planning engagements that are better aligned with your core program objectives. And then for the challenge around not generating enough coverage from the analysts that you meet with most frequently, which, we also would assume that those are the analysts that matter most in your space, you would want to be a little bit more proactive in asking them about their near-term research and how your bench of spokespeople can be helpful to them. That way, you get a better understanding of their research agenda, and in turn, you'll be better able to tee up conversations that add value at the precise time of need, and then increasing your chances of landing in more of their reports. When it comes to the coverage quality score inputs, this could help you identify some trends in coverage that's being generated and some really specific details on how you can optimize when you're looking to target more meaningful analyst coverage. So for instance, key learnings from this analysis could include identifying that you're securing coverage from strong tier 1 firms, but perhaps the majority of these reports just aren't authored by the most influential analysts in your space. Additionally, you could learn that your program is generating a strong cadence of analyst coverage, yet your organization's key messages are not being pulled through in those reports. So that would indicate that more work is needed to educate analysts and influence how they perceive your business and or your products. But regardless of what you measure, measurement provides an opportunity to analyze all of these inputs incrementally throughout the year and then create a continuous improvement loop. That way you can, like we said, it's not for the faint of heart, but hopefully you can use the inputs to really drive improvement across the board. Duncan, are there any examples, anything that you want to speak to just in terms of any measurement insights that your teams have used to spot trends or, maybe even adjust any program strategies?
Obviously, the key observations about finding the unmute button all the way over there on the other
Technology
monitor.
is hard.
Yeah, well, it's really not. The unmute button is there. It's the same place every day, but it confuses me. I'd say one thing that's really important is this point about business goals. Yes, you've got different business goals for different programs, and that means that different pieces of content, different pieces of coverage, they just might hit differently. And so one of the questions that submitted just now is about measuring the value of content, say for lead generation, is a different thing from measuring the value of content for product management, for product marketing, for social media, for PR. In a way, it's really easy to follow a lead. Like I had a client of mine, $45 million company, licensed a piece of analyst content. They had one lead that came in that led to like a $4.3 million deal. That's like 10% of their revenue from the year from one report from an analyst firm that wasn't even one of the top 10 analyst firms. And what I've seen over the years is actually there are quite a lot of firms that are generating more than 10% of their sales from licensed content. Yeah, so I think that's something that is very important to measure if you're doing it, but also super productive. Yeah, because that's a lot of money. Measuring the value of the inbound value of analyst relations on decision making is much harder to measure, and it's one of the things. Some people will have read Ephraim Malik's book "Win Them Over," like the first book on analyst relations, and he puts a lot of weight on actually you in the same way that correcting a problem in code earlier on is much cheaper than correcting a problem in code later on or after it's become deployed. Being able to get analyst insights into the business earlier rather than later can massively improve the performance of the business, not just on the product side but also on the marketing side. Earlier on, you spoke about category creation. So a few days ago, we published an interview that I did with Jerome Pinot, who's written this book on category creation for analyst relations. And intriguingly, one of the things that he really stresses is almost as much as the benefit of creating a category is the benefit of de-risking the language that you use about market segmentation. If you're able to test this against the market, you can generate a huge amount of value. But measuring that inbound value is really tricky. I think another area somebody else submitted a question about. Lots of people are spending money on licensing content. Here at CC Group, we're big fans of producing derivative content that is not licensed, but where we are producing copyright-free hooks that might, for example, push people to an analyst piece of content, but where we've written that hook and we're tracking the traffic or even gating traffic on the way through to some download, or where we are, rephrasing or praising or amplifying what analysts say, and the content that we ourselves write, drawing attention to analysts. This can be just as effective or sometimes more effective because of the way that you can design it to look like a hook that somebody can engage with online, unlike an analyst PDF that just kind of lies there like a dead fish. I think that is really significant. I think coverage quality is such a powerful notion, not just because of obvious analogous ways that come over from the way that media relations colleagues look at this. Is it a headline mention? Is it a passing mention? Are you quoted? Like these sorts of things really matter. But even thinking about what the quality of the source as well. Obviously, you may see that there are some, that there might be some firms that might mention you a lot, but actually they might be very cautious on you. And when you look at, you might generate a lot of leads, but then when you look at the conversion rate of those leads, you got 100 leads in from a Gartner report, but when you look at the conversion rate, you see that the 100 people who came in from the Gartner report maybe bought you less often than 10 people who came in from a Forrester report, because the Forrester report loved you and the Gartner report was very neutral about you. Yeah? So metrics are hugely useful, and frankly, they should even wind back into analyst relations targeting and prioritization, because if the Gartner analysts are always going to be like very milky, very kind of lean back, very passive, not really generate any share of voice for you, not really speaking about you in a compelling way. I mean, okay, they're everywhere, but they're just mumbling your name. Whereas there might be somebody else who's more opinionated, more incisive, more favorable. Maybe Andrew Tew at Spotlight PR has been speaking for years about making smaller, bigger bets. Yeah? And I think these kinds of metrics, they help you to make smaller, bigger bets much more confidently, and to really align that to the value that you're producing for the business. So
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
these kinds of measurements are massively powerful, and they draw and they link up this thing of looking at how the AR program is doing and what is the value for the business. Yeah. There's another comment that somebody made, which another comment that somebody made about, engaging your stakeholders with metrics. These metrics help you engage with stakeholders.
Absolutely. And what you were just talking about, Duncan, in terms of, having insight into the performance of campaigns, of content, that's so critical. And I think it's visibility that so often we lack for a variety of reasons. But if you want to actually pull up the next slide, there's some really interesting data charts, et cetera, that you can develop when you have some of these insights and you're really able to make those data-based recommendations. Especially this is focused on, if you have data on the performance of those reprint investments or webinar investments, this data can help you determine the return in terms of the total amount invested in each firm, which is kind of the chart on the left. And then on the right, you can dig deeper and you can see the performance of each individual analyst campaign. And really, from both of these sets of data, you can better inform and you can better guide how colleagues invest their budget in future pieces of analyst content or analyst collaborations. Because you can see historically what's performed best and what's delivered those strongest returns. So instead of relying on maybe what previously was a gut instinct, or maybe it was an incomplete set of data, you can have access to some of these hard data to really just help people make their investment decisions. And even if your company doesn't have access to the actual revenue pieces, you're not out of luck. I think, there's still an opportunity to replace the revenue data with data on downloads, with data on qualified leads, web traffic data, anything that you can get your hands on to demonstrate just the impact and the performance of that campaign is really valuable. That way, you can go back and you can just gauge where to invest for future pieces of content. I think we can skip to the next slide and just go through it really, really quickly. And then we can kind of go over some of the final takeaways. So time is another valuable thing that you can measure just to analyze kind of your results based on the analyst engagements that you're holding, the coverage that those are achieving, and any key messages that are secured. Looking at these engagements, you're able to just see kind of the relation of coverage secured and time spent, and you can gauge if your time should be better allocated in the future. And if we keep going, Duncan, just being conscious of time. So just a quick review of what we covered today. One is really the most valuable measurement. It's not easy. It's going to require time. It's going to require work to uncover the results that demonstrate impact. But make sure that you resist the urge to settle for less valuable data that you have easy access to. Number two, we can't understate the importance of establishing a measurement framework at the outset versus implementing one after an initiative or a plan is underway. You really need to have a clear understanding of the objective and how it aligns to a key business priority before you can establish measurable goals. And then once those goals are set, you want to measure your results early and often. And then lastly, use your newfound data to showcase the good, but also be sure that you lean into that unfavorable data to identify weaknesses. This is the knowledge that will enable you to adjust your approach and develop an even stronger strategy going forward. And even better, you'll have that baseline data to showcase just how far your program has improved over time. So with that, I think we've got a couple closing polls just to get a sense of how valuable this content was, and if there are any takeaways that you'll put into practice from today's session. And then I think we do have a slide, Duncan, with our contact information in case there's any follow-up questions that people have.
100% of the people who took the poll said that they found it useful. So that is.
We'll take it. That's awesome.
And then there was one more poll as well. Yeah. The other thing that I've got on the next slide, if people have got a minute, is just information about our next webinar that is coming up. So when votes have stopped coming in, 2/3 of people say they are very likely to implement some of the changes in this poll. So that is lovely.
Great to
And
hear.
then, yeah, this is our next webinar with Ashwin, former IDC analyst who's been at FutureSource, and myself, talking about the turmoil in the economy and what can AR do. There's a bit.ly link up there that you can use to run to get a breakdown of our answers there, both for analysts, for vendors, and for buyers as well. There are a pile of unanswered questions, Jen, which I'll share with you. And if there's anything that you want to send out along with the slides, then of course we will make this happen. Do you have any final thoughts before I close the webinar?
I think the last piece of advice I guess I would give people is to start small, right? This doesn't, these types of changes, they're not going to happen overnight. It's a journey. So, first and foremost, just make sure that your program is aligned with some larger business priorities and that you have objectives and success metrics that kind of ladder up to those. And then from there, you can focus on pinpointing how to showcase your results in a way that will resonate with your stakeholders. But yeah, I think it's a progression, it's an evolution. So don't be overwhelmed. Start small and continue building from there.
Totally. Thank you so much, Jen. For everybody who asked questions, also for the people whose questions we weren't able to answer, thank you so much. We'll do our best to get back to you about those, and then obviously register for the webinar. Let us know what you think. If you've got suggestions for other webinars, then let us know there as well. Okay, thank you so much. It's been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed it. Jen, thank you so much for sharing. You're so generous, and I think these worked examples of yours that I've seen, they always get so much enthusiasm, and I know they really translate the general idea that people have that they should be tracking these things, and it gives them a way that they can present them and let their stakeholders see the value in what AR is doing. And I think knowing what to capture is only a small part of it. It is how to present it so the stakeholders get the value in what we're doing that is so important.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, and good luck. I look forward to seeing what people are able to develop.
Exactly. Thank you so much. Okay, I'll close the webinar now. Thank you so much for the audience, along for the audience as well, for coming along to join us. Thank you. Cheers. Bye-bye.